What's up everyone, and recently Bungie announced that weapons will have a lifespan of roughly 1 year for all legendary weapons. This has divided a large portion of the community, and while we do not know all of the details, we do know enough to form opinions on the system, so today I'd like to discuss the pros and cons of weapon sunsetting as proposed by Bungie. So to start off with, let's go over what we know about weapon sunsetting that Bungie has given us. Basically, weapon sunsetting means weapons cannot be infused to a higher light than whatever the power cap is 3 seasons from the season the weapon is introduced, or the equivalent of 4 seasons. This, from what we know, only affects legendaries, and some weapons, such as raid weapons, will have longer lifespans and exotics are exempt. All of this also applies to armor. And if you are wondering why Bungie is doing this, they are doing this because it is their solution to power creep. And power creep, for those of you who don't know, is basically every time new content comes out, the weapons and gear in it have to be more powerful, otherwise we won't use it and we'll just use our older stuff. And the problem with this is that as new content comes out, the power just keeps on creeping, and soon there's almost no skill gap, and the time to kill is super low, and a bunch of other problems with power creep, and this is a solution that Bungie's come up with. So let's go over the pros and cons to this weapon sunsetting system that Bungie has proposed. So to start with, let's go over the good from this. First of all, there's no power creep, as they can just keep making weapons as powerful as we currently have. This also incentivizes using new weapons instead of just using your same spare rations that you've had for over a year now. This also allows for new powerful weapons to shine without having to top recluse. And also, this system solves the problem of power creep by not having to remove the old weapons. It just makes them not viable in the in-game activities. Now to talk about the bad aspects of this system. First of all, as I just said, we lose access to the weapons that we like in in-game activities like trials and raids. This also de-incentivizes people grinding out the new pinnacle weapons because they'll only be useful for a certain amount of time. This system also isn't the best for the current armor grind that we have, because the current grind to get a full set of Master Rank armor is quite a lot, and a lot of people will just not want to do that if they're going to have to replace all of their armor within a year. Okay, so with all of that out of the way, I would like to give my thoughts on sunsetting. Basically, I support weapon sunsetting because it seems like a good middle ground between the systems in Destiny 1 and the current system in Destiny 2. For those of you who don't remember, in Destiny 1, at the end of every year, all of the gear that was released throughout that year was rendered useless and replaced by the gear that dropped with the fall expansion. So for instance, if there was a spring expansion, that gear was only viable for 5 months or so. This current sunsetting system, instead of having a hard end date at the end of every year where all gear is rendered useless, it instead slowly fades out gear season after season so that each piece of equipment is guaranteed at least 1 year of usage. And even after its guaranteed year, it can still be used in all non-pinnacle activities, which is basically just everything except for raids, trials, and the Nightfall ordeals. This means you can still take your Revoker and your Recluse and your Mountaintop into competitive Crucible, you just cannot use it in trials. And while I find this system to be very reasonable, there are some minor gripes that I have that I wish Bungie could address. First of all, I wish that armor was exempt, as armor already has a sort of sunsetting mechanic. For those of you who don't know, armor currently has a seasonal mod slot, and that seasonal mod slot can only use seasonal mods from the season it was released in, the season before it, and the season after it. This already incentivizes people to grind new armor so that they can take advantage of the new seasonal builds. To then sunset armor on top of all of this just seems completely unnecessary in my opinion. Another concern I have with this system is legendary weapons that are paired with exotics. For instance, Drang and Sturm, or Mida Mini Tool and the Mida Multi-Tool. I think that these legendaries should be exempt, as especially with Sturm and Drang, Sturm is essentially useless without Drang, because its exotic perk essentially revolves around having Drang in your secondary slot. Also, in the TWAB that Bungie discussed, the sunsetting mechanic, they said that Last Wish and Garden of Salvation raid loot would have longer lifespans. They failed to mention any other raids such as Scourge of the Past or Crown of Sorrow, and it would be a real big shame to lose these raids as their gear becomes completely obsolete. So in order to remedy this, I think that every season Bungie should feature a raid. For instance, one season it can be Scourge of the Past, next it can be Crown of Sorrow, then the Leviathan, and so on. That way you can always grind an additional raid in addition to the Last Wish and Garden of Salvation. And it keeps these raids relevant, as it would be a real shame to have these amazing raids go to waste. Finally, I think that Bungie should take this opportunity to create more missions along the lines of Outbreak Perfected and the Whisper of the Worm. What I mean by this is that since you're retiring a lot of these old, extremely powerful pinnacle weapons, you could reprise them as even more powerful exotic weapons. For instance, imagine if one season we just randomly pick up a quest and it leads to getting an exotic version of the Recluse or an exotic version of the Revoker. These weapons would be more powerful than their current versions and also be exotic, so they can be used throughout the rest of Destiny 2's lifespan. This would be a really easy way for Bungie to add free content into the game without having to put too much effort in, as the mechanics of the guns are basically already set in stone. But those are just my thoughts on gear sunsetting, and I would love to hear yours in the comments down below. And if you liked the video, please leave a thumbs up, and if you want to hear more videos like this, please subscribe so you don't miss my next video. So until next time, goodbye.